I always tell a story when I was a principal. I was brand new principal when class size reduction hit. Anybody in the room remember those days, class size reduction, K-3? So I was a brand new principal. I had to hire 14 teachers within like a couple of weeks because it happened really quickly. And we had in our district, we had all of our schools had to do it. It was a K-8 school district. And so we were in the room of about 40 people. All the principals with their teams, and these poor young teachers would come in and sit in the hot spot, and then we would have to interview them in front of this very large group. And we were interviewing this one teacher, Angie Hicks, and I was asking her questions, and she got all red in her face and in her neck, and she looked at me and she said, "I am sorry, but you need to speak up. I cannot hear you. I really want this job. This is really important to me. And if you can't speak louder, I can't answer the question." I hired Angie Hicks. And to this day, she's a really good friend of mine and a really, really incredible teacher. So, well, it's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. I will tell you, I am not feeling my best. I was up ill most of the night, so I'm running on coffee and passion, in particular because I'm excited to speak with you. I do enjoy speaking in particular about the California Collaborative. Also, I'm coming off a day yesterday that was really quite historical that I'm going to share a little bit about. It'll be a little bit, I'll give a little more context when I share with you the system of support graphic that we have in particular. And one of the things that I wanted to do first, before I do that, is I wanted to get a sense of who's in the room. So where are the teachers in the room, if you could raise your hand? Great. How about elementary teachers? What? Middle school teachers? All middle school? No high school? Okay. How about the administrators in the room? Okay. Any superintendents in the room? Board members? That's kind of it, teachers and school administrators? Okay. So the first thing I wanted to do also is I want to make sure that I take an opportunity to thank you. Thank you for what you do for children, what you've done for children, and what you will continue to do for children. I think for folks, you can never be thanked enough for what you do. You do incredible work. You really change lives of kids. And one of the things I want to share with you is some of the people who changed my life and why I chose to become an educator, and in particular why 7 months ago I applied for this job. And what I can tell you is it took me, and I share this story with you because it took me 11 years. I'm in my 34th year. I know, hard to imagine, I look so young, right? I'm in my 34th year as an educator, and it was 11 years into my career before I actually shared my own personal story, and partially because I was embarrassed by it. And I had taught for 8 years. I had been an assistant principal in a large middle school of about 1,800 kids, and I got promoted to become a principal, and our superintendent had built a brand new school. We'd passed a bond, and so they built Boulder Creek Elementary School, about 700 kids. It is in its second year. It was a highly requested school, so those of you who know anything about Shasta County, and you'd be surprised. So Shasta County is far north, right? So Redding, California. That's where I was at for 30 years. And in Shasta County, what a lot of folks don't recognize about Shasta County is it really has quite a bit of high poverty. It's about 70% of the kids in Shasta County come from homes of free and reduced lunch. Has the highest meth rate in the state, and has the highest death rate in the state. Third highest teen pregnancy in the state. I didn't know that when I went there. I didn't know anything about that. And so what was unique about my school in particular is this school was a very affluent school. The superintendent built this school, and he had invited all the folks in town to be able to come to this school. And Shasta County was very unique. In 1992, they passed a county-wide initiative that any student in the county could go to any school in the county. That there was open enrollment in the whole county. Really unusual. 92. Open enrollment in the county so that any kid could go anywhere in the county and that folks would not deny them that access to be able to go. So it was, and in some sense, it was a very competitive environment for students. Boulder Creek opened, and if you know anything about new schools attract kids automatically. People look at the school and they say, wow, that's a beautiful looking school. Must be good education going on in that school. Boulder Creek in particular, the superintendent had went out, shopped the school, and so we had 63% of the folks in the school came from outside the school district. I came there in the second year. Systems were already developed at that time to where folks would come, so would really compete to be able to kind of get into that school. What was unique about it is, probably the downside is that If you were a parent who moved down the street over the summer, you could not get into that school. It was already full. So parents were shocked. They didn't like that. As you can imagine, we moved here, right? The very unusual thing. They would actually have that when they would sign up students to be able to go to the school, they would have a waiting list, and folks would camp out with sleeping bags at midnight and get in line so that they could get a spot in the school. The superintendent had handpicked the teachers in the school. Here I came, brand new young administrator in that school. Again, folks not knowing not much about me. So I came into that school. One of the things that I asked the superintendent's permission for was, could I handpick some kids to come to the school? And he said, sure, but don't tell anybody. Truth, right? So I would have families who would come in. I got appointed in the spring in that position, and so I was there all summer. And I would have families come in and tell their story and want to get into the school. Some of them moved in the neighborhood. Some, it wasn't a real affluent neighborhood, right? Some would tell me their stories or whatever. Other ones I knew a little bit. I might have known the brother and sister because I taught at the middle school. And so I would put them at the head of the list. And I slipped them into classrooms without anybody knowing. Nobody. I didn't tell anybody who that was. One of the students was Dennis Coleman. So Dennis Coleman was a fourth grader. He was in Kathy Benedetti's class. And Kathy Benedetti was a good teacher. You know, she cared about kids. Had pretty strong academics, and Dennis was an extreme discipline problem. African-American boy, came from a very, very difficult home. There's a lot of things I didn't know about Dennis. His dad was in prison. He was living with his aunt. His mom had died from an overdose. His aunt had come and told me his story. So I got Dennis into this classroom. I didn't know anything about Kathy Benedetti. I didn't know much of those teachers at all. Had no idea what kind of teacher she was. Well, Dennis and Kathy did not get along. So she would send Dennis to the office constantly send Dennis to the office. I would spend time with Dennis. We would walk the track. We would cruise around. We'd try to talk to him about his behavior. And he kept saying, that lady don't like me, right? She didn't like me. Doesn't matter what I do. I get in trouble. She's constantly kicking him out. Dennis was from outside the district. So Kathy Benedetti came and talked to me about 2 weeks into school and said, kid's got to go. I'm like, what do you mean? She said, he's not one of ours. I'm like, who's one of ours? We got 67% coming from outside the district. They're all ours. Yeah, but he can go because he's on an inter-district transfer, which means we can get rid of him. I'm like, yeah, most of the kids here are on inter-district transfers, right? We could, right? So even though we had open enrollment, we still did these inter-district transfers. People signed them. We put them in a file, didn't worry too much about them. I didn't look at kids as to where they came from. It was just they were all of our students. So this went on with Kathy and I for about another week. And so finally she sent Dennis down. He was really upset. It was a real minor thing. She didn't want him. So she showed up in my office, and she was just very frustrated and wanted to talk about, you know, and what had happened was there had been a small incident, and I sent Dennis back to class. And she was really upset about that because she really wanted me to send him home. And what you know about a lot of kids who are at-risk kids, right? Home was not the place for Dennis, right? Really, Dennis really needed to be in school. So at the end of the day, she came in, she's furious with me, she's yelling, she's upset about it. Why do you keep advocating for Dennis? And I broke out in tears and I said, because I was a Dennis Coleman. And she's like, what are you talking about? And so I told her real briefly my story. So I'm from upstate New York. I'm one of 9 children. My family, I grew up extremely poor. I grew up in a Catholic family. I grew up in an abusive home. My dad was very abusive. My mom was a very loving, strong Catholic woman, right? My mom had my oldest sister, Debbie, when she was 15. My oldest sister, Debbie, had her first child when she was 15. My second sister, Denise, had her first child when she was 16. My 2 other brothers both went in the service as soon as they could, and I was the 6th one in that. And one of the things about school, I didn't like school much as a kid. I got in a lot of trouble, right? Because I didn't do well with discipline, because I grew up in a pretty strong home of discipline. But I had some teachers along the way. One in particular I remember really strongly. It was funny, my wife and I were having this conversation with her stepdaughters even this weekend, and we were trying to talk about how far do you remember back? She can remember preschool. I don't remember past 2nd grade. I really don't. I remember little bits and pieces of 2nd grade. I don't remember kindergarten. I don't remember preschool. Her daughters were talking about all these pieces with that. But I remember fourth grade, because fourth grade I got Mrs. Coterie. And Mrs. Coterie, one of the things that my mom did is my mom was an avid reader. She read the Bible, and she also read all kinds of scary stories, what she called them. And she loved any of those kind of books. And so my mom read, so I loved to read. I was always into reading, so I read a lot on my own. My mom would read. We were very poor. We didn't have a television for many, many years. We didn't have a telephone until I was in 8th grade. So we read. So I read quite a bit, and I was always really good at math. Math just kind of worked for me. So Miss Coterie, when I was in 4th grade, we had moved. I'd already moved 7 times before I was in the 4th grade. I was a new kid. She was just this sweet lady who interviewed my mom, and which was really unique, right? She asked my mom to come in, and she interviewed my mom and asked her all about me. What makes him tick? What's he like to do? And she's like, he really likes to read, whatever. First day at school, comes time to read. We're reading a novel together. She asked me to get up and read. I'm a little bit shy about this. She's like, no, you're a really good reader. So I got up and read, right? And she kept calling on me for like days on end. She continued to ask me to call up and read. And it was kind of cool, too, because at one point she'd asked this other kid, Stephen Luck, his name was. I remember him to this day. She's like, Stephen, why don't you get up and read? And he goes, could you have that new kid read? I really like the way he reads. And so I felt wonderful about this lady. Had this lady in my life, and that 4th grade year. And so school was kind of a place where I could go. And then in 9th grade, in particular, I had, so I'm from upstate New York. Anybody from East Coast? New York? Anybody? All right, so if you're from New York, you will know in New York they have 2 tracks. I think they still have it. They have a Regents and a non-Regents, right? So, and you can imagine, right, there's the Regents is sort of like AP, right? So 9th grade, I go to high school. And remember, my family, I had no idea what Regents or non-Regents was. Didn't have a clue. Didn't know there was even a difference. So I'm in math class, and one thing that also school was always helpful for me was I was a good athlete. And where I grew up on the East Coast, wrestling was huge, especially in upstate New York. Everybody, wrestling was kind of the thing. So I liked that, right? So I was a wrestler. I wrestled in junior high and as a kid. And so in high school, I made the 9th grade varsity wrestling team, 98-pounder. And Mr. Barber was our wrestling coach, who was also my 3rd period math teacher. And we had to go from the high school, we would actually go over to one of the elementary schools, which is a little bit of a ways away, to be able to have to go to practice. And you had to get yourself to practice. And I had no way to get to practice. And I told Mr. Barber that the first day, and he's like, that's fine, come to my class after school, and I'll give you a ride to practice. I said, okay. So this went on for a couple days. And it was around November, I think, when it started. And we were talking, and we kind of got to know each other a little bit. And he says to me, he goes, and ARMELINO, why are you in the non-Regents class? You seem like a pretty smart kid. I'm like, the hell's non-Regents? I didn't know what it was. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. He goes, you really should be in the Regents class, and I have an opening in my 7th period class, which would make it easier for you if I can give you a ride. So I'm going to put you in my 7th period class. Okay. Now I'm in the Regents track. I took the Regents math test, got a 99 in my freshman year. I know I was on this track, all because this educator, right, who looked at me and said, you really should be here. Some of it was by chance, right, but moved me into that class. It was interesting. It was that point I'm like, oh, maybe I'm as smart as these other kids. Maybe I can kind of make it. Now, what I'd like to be able to tell you is that everything was great after that. Didn't work out that way. Got my high school girlfriend pregnant in 11th grade and dropped out of school with her, and we went to Oregon. Got our GED. And from there, I went back to school years later, ended up moving there and got into this other position. But the reason why I tell that story is that, as I had said, up until that point, when I had not shared that story, so I had not been honest with the other folks who I was expecting to really nurture kids, and Mrs. Benedetti, I really was kind of a gift, right, where she was able to have this kind of moment with me. And so we were able to tell her, and that's why I explained to her why I was doing it. And so then she said, you know what? You should tell everybody else that. So we went back to our next meeting, and we had this large conversation as a school. And remember, this was a superintendent's school, right? This is one that he had built. And when I told that story, I had about 6 other teachers get up and tell their story. And many of them had very similar stories, right? All a little bit different, right? And in particular about where was their passion for kids. It got to the point where they're like, you know what, we should go back and we should talk to the superintendent. We ended up doing a proposal for the superintendent that 30% of the students would allow ourselves to open ourselves up at 30% for we can pick and choose the at-risk kids in the community to come to our school. And he agreed to it. So anyway, I say that because when I applied for this position in particular, so from that time, you know, I was very fortunate. I was a teacher, and then I was an assistant principal and a principal. I became an assistant superintendent, a district superintendent, and then I was a county superintendent. And so in each of those positions, right, what I always found is I got further and further away from kids. Right? It was always a bit of a struggle for me. I loved teaching. I really liked my kids. And I recognized part of what I needed to do was, if I was going to have any success of reaching kids, I needed to do it through other adults, right? Really being able to impact other adults in that work. So I continue, even in every position I had, to try to engage the adults who were working with their kids on what they felt was best for their students and what could I do to help them. When I went to the county, any county office people? Not a one. All right. So just so you know, in our county, I had no idea what the county office did. I was a larger district in my area, so I really didn't have a whole lot. I didn't have bad feelings about the county office. I just didn't depend on them because we were a larger district in our area. And the only reason why I went there is we had a group of superintendents. We had some things that weren't going well with the current county superintendent, and we were losing opportunities in our area for grants and other things. And so all the soups got together and sat down and decided who should run for this position. And it was me and another guy that they really asked to do it. I was just younger, right? And they're like, okay, so you'll do it for a little while. And I'm like, look, I'll do it if you guys support me, right? So they all supported me, and so I ran unopposed for 3 terms. But when I got there, what I saw was, in particular, what county offices do is I always tell folks, county offices work with a lot of the kids that everybody else has struggled with. So the kids that we now had, right, I had large preschools, but we also had a large court and community school. We had the students in juvenile hall, and we had really students with really strong special ed needs. My first 2 days, my second day on the job, we had a girl OD at our court and community school and die. And I went and visited her at the hospital and met her father. It was brutal. The next week, I had another girl got the heck beat out of her by some girls in a gang. And what I was alarmed about that, and I went to the hospital and I met her father, and he was telling me, and he's like, she's a really good kid, right? And I'm like, well, all parents say she's really good. He goes, no, she's never been in trouble. I'm like, what are you talking about? This school's for kids who right around probation and have these issues. He's like, no, she's never been in trouble. I'm like, no, that can't be right. So I was kind of listening to him going, that's just a dad's perspective. So we went back and checked the data on this young girl, and she had come to us the prior year. She was an 8th grader. She was an 8th grader, and she had never been in trouble, but she had a huge attendance problem. And what had happened is the prior year, her mom had died. And her mom had died in that fall, and so it was with dad, and her dad was struggling financially too. So he didn't, they nurtured each other. She didn't go to school, right? And so she had a truancy issue. And so she had a huge problem, and they sent her to school. They SARB'd her and sent her to our school in the spring. And what I didn't even know is that point is we took kids for both behavior and attendance and threw them in the same school with gang kids, right? And this young lady had a boy who was in a gang who thought she was cute, was checking her out, was hitting on her, and she smiled and she appreciated the affection. And the boy's ex-girlfriend, who was in a gang, also saw this, and her and 2 other girls beat the hell out of her in the bathroom next period. It's hard to make these things up, right? And so what I saw in particular with that school is we had a bunch of kids that shouldn't be there. So, long story long, we made quite a bit of changes in that school. But one of the unique changes that we made and in particular around some of your work, is that we really worked on trying to close the digital divide for kids. And in particular, what I found with those students is that none of those students had access to technology, right? And everybody, when we started having conversations around giving them a one-on-one device, putting them on shorter days for some of the students, doing some online courses in particular, just trying to look at various ways to be able to meet their needs. We had to make sure that we would give them technology, so we had to give them technology access at home. We were going to give them a one-on-one computer. Everybody told us, don't do it. And why? What were the things they said would happen? Tell me. What's that? They'll sell it. Yep, that was one of them. What else? They'll break it. What else? They'll vandalize it. What else? What's that? They'll get stolen. They'll leave, right? Never give it back. They'll watch porn. I got that all the time. They'll watch porn. They'll do this. They'll get on Facebook. They'll do all this other stuff. They'll use gang-related things. We're like, okay, right? So you had to put some securities on there, right? Obviously, because it's a school-related thing when it came to where they could go, right? First year, we lost 3 computers, 3 total, right? 2 of the 3 they moved away and didn't bring them back, and one of them, kids stole it and sold it to someone else. 3, right? And we had 600 kids in that school. We went on, what ended up happening with that school in particular is we ended up making that school a charter school a few years later on, and made it in particular because that was when LCFF hit. And what else, a lot of folks don't know about LCFF, when local control funding formula hit, any student who was in a county program, that student, wherever the district where they were from, I had to actually write them a check back to that student. So any of the students that we had in our program, I had to sit and, I had to actually, I'm sorry, that's wrong. I had to send them a bill for them to give me the income for that student because they got it locally. And when we first did that, the district superintendents were like, what? They didn't want to send this bill, even though they weren't educating them. And I had a couple of the high school district superintendent in particular, who was a good friend of mine, who said, those are our kids, Tom. You know, those are our kids. You shouldn't have that school. Those kids should go to our school. And I'm like, cool, here they are. Here's their list. Get them back, right? None of the students wanted to go back because they hadn't had good experiences in particular. So anyway, so what we did is we said, I went back to our teachers and talked to them about it when the teachers said, let's make it a charter school. If we make it a charter school, right, then they'll be ours, we'll get the income, we'll go from there. And so that's what we ended up doing. So about 4 years ago, the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence was created. And when it was created under the local control funding formula. So Dr. Kurse, who just retired from the state board, this was his brainchild. Actually wrote this back in the 70s. The 70s, he had this idea around local control and that we should look at funding locally and trying to change the system. And if you know anything historically, when Governor Brown was the governor back, the first time, Michael Kurse worked with him at that time. They actually were colleagues back from Stanford years ago. And they had talked about this concept for years. So here it came about 3 or 4 years ago. So 4 years ago, they came up with this concept. I was very fortunate at that time as a county superintendent in rural California that I got appointed to serve on what he called his kitchen cabinet. So he had a group of us, there was 9 of us in the state. I was the rural guy up in Shasta. And so we got to sit in a room with him and Dr. Kurse and other really smart people, a lot smarter than me, sitting in a room, and he was talking about how we were going to make this thing work, right? And during that conversation, they were having conversation around this, what they call at that time, this education FICMAT. Anybody familiar with FICMAT? So FICMAT is the Fiscal Crisis Management Assistance Team. It's a mouthful. FICMAT was created in the 70s as well when Oakland and Compton went bankrupt. And what happened is when they went bankrupt because people were corrupt in those school districts and there was no accountability. So all these things occurred, but nobody knew what was happening. So they created AB 1200. And AB 1200 was now to where if a district's budget would now have to go to county offices and it would have to be reviewed. And the county office would then make this determination if their budget was positive or certified or qualified or negative. And they put that, it was kind of a checks and balances, and they created FCMAT at that time to be another resource for county offices when a district was struggling financially. So they've been around since the 70s. Just so you know, since the 70s, there's been 9, only 9. There's only been 9 schools in the state that, since that was put in place, that went bankrupt, basically, that have student loans. To this day, there's 4 left. So there's 4, and I want to share with you a little bit about some of our work. So FCMAT was created. Well, during this conversation, they were having this conversation around, we need an academic FCMAT. We need another resource, in particular for struggling schools. So they created the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. And in the first 3 years, the funding was all one-time funding. And remember, that was when the beginning of the accountability system, to where we didn't have the dashboard yet, right? So we didn't have multiple years of data. So in particular, we didn't know which were, well, we knew, right? But we didn't know, according to the state's academic system, who those struggling students were. So Carl Cohn, my predecessor, when Carl was hired, they would actually call Carl into a room because they were trying to figure out, what are we going to do with this thing, right? We don't know what those schools are yet. And they'd call Carl into a room and they'd say, Carl, here's $8 million. We want you to go out and we want you to train folks on what the LCAP is. Carl, here's $3 million. We want you to go out and train some folks on when the dashboard came out. Carl, here's $13 million that we want you to go out and do this work with these pilot school districts that raised their hand, right? In particular, and said, we're struggling, we'd really like some help, right? And so there was a lot of experimenting that was going on during that time. Fast forward to this year, so Carl retired in June. July came along. I was serving as an executive director for the National Association of School Superintendents. It's a national program, spending a lot of time in Washington, D.C. I'd been asked to kind of take that role. And I was thinking I'd do that for a few years and I'd go retire, right? And then this position came open. And I had a lot of folks express this interest of wanting to be a part of it. And in particular, where I was really attracted to it was, especially based on Carl's leadership, is that what's cool about our role is we get to support. Actually, in the statute, it says our job is to advise and assist. We have no accountability in regards to anything that tells the district what to do, right? We don't have any authority to go in and say you should do this. We're not tied to the old system, and the old system around program improvement. Anybody remember the program improvement? Anybody had a program improvement school? I did. Anybody program improvement district? I did. That's right. A lot of us, right? And that old system was built around when you became a program improvement school or district, they come in, it was a team of people that would show up, and they would come in and tell you what you needed to do to get better. I had that happen to me when I was a district superintendent. I was so furious, right? In particular, because we were working our tail off, right, to really do good things for kids, and they didn't come in and look at anything we were doing. They just came in and made assumptions, and based on those assumptions said you need to do this, and we'd already done half of what they talked about years prior to that. We had really tough kids, right? We were struggling, and it takes time. So when this position came open, and I'm like, all right, I'm in. This is something I really want to be a part of. Also, Carl's great leadership. For the first year, this year, we actually have ongoing money. So we are somebody who's built here to stay. Carl kind of had to prove over those first few years, this is really worth keeping this organization. So what I want to share with you today is in particular, with that money, just like with any piece of money, comes some strings. And so we have more strings now, if you will, attached to that money than we've had prior, which tells us what it was we need to do. So we have less ability to experiment. And in particular, like this whole idea I talked to you about the pilot schools, that money will end this year with our pilot schools. And what the state's saying now is we don't need pilot schools anymore because we know who those schools are that are really struggling, and we want you in there. So I'm going to share 2 things in particular. One is around this whole idea of this new accountability system called the system of support. And then the other piece is around AB 1840, which was a new assembly bill that was passed in August that now kind of identifies specifically the work that we're asked to do. And one of the things I want to ask you first is when I say the state system of support, how many of the people in the room, one, know what I'm talking about? Yeah, that is amazing to me, right? Everywhere I go, that's pretty common, unless I'm in a room with superintendents. Superintendents are like, oh yeah, I know what that thing is, right? I got that. Everybody else is like, I never even heard of it. Or other people are like, I kind of heard of it, but I don't know what it is. And folks, it's our new accountability system. It's the new state's accountability system that will affect everybody in this room, right? What's interesting about it, so it's a very unique system, and it's built all around this whole idea of LCFF. So I want to make sure I share with you what that looks like. It's actually built now. And in statute, it even identifies who and what our role is in regards to facilitation of it, and then AB 1840. And if we have a little bit of time too, I want to brag a little bit about some of the work that we've been able to do. Got a lot of slides, so I'm going to probably kind of go pretty quickly, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time as we go too. So, where am I pointing it? Here? Point there, okay. It's not working. Maybe I turned it off. You want to do it for me? Thank you. Is it working? Can I have it back? Thank you. All right, so California, down button. Oh, that's the problem. It's the user. So, darn it. Sorry, guys. I'm getting it here. Come on. All right. So this is actually the statute. Statute says California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, a statewide agency to exist to advise and assist LEAs in achieving their LCAP goals, and shall do so by facilitating continuous improvement for LEAs within the state system of support. That's language has changed a little bit. The only thing that's changed since when Carl first came in is the last sentence, within the state system of support, because there was not one at that time. I'm very fortunate. We're very small. We have about 20 folks, right? I have some incredibly bright and talented folks with some educational leadership, some research backgrounds, instructional practices, PD, outreach, and communications. 1840 is a new bill, too, and the reason why I bring this up is now in statute, you'll see us in two places. One is you'll see us around the state system of support, and then you'll see us in this new bill around AB 1840. And really, and what I'll tell you that in a nutshell is that, as I mentioned earlier, there's 4 districts in the state, which they refer to them as they're in fiscal distress, which means they have a state loan, right? And in those 4 districts, there's 1 district in the state that has a state administrator, right? That's Inglewood. So Inglewood is down in the LA area. So Inglewood is the only district in the state now that has a state administrator, which means the superintendent was removed. The board lost all their authority 7 years ago. And then at that time, the state superintendent of schools, Superintendent Torlickson, assigned a state administrator, somebody to go into that district to kind of try to right the ship. What's interesting about Inglewood in particular is that in that 7 years, they've lost 9,000 students. 9,000 students, right? So they've continued to lose students while they're struggling in particular, so they've lost a lot of resources, and they've had 6 different state administrators. And what we know about leadership, Inglewood's in the house?
Yeah.
No. All right, right on, right? And so you can tell the story better than I could, right? And the folks living in that, right, have seen some of what that is. And in truth, what I will tell you is, it's not a secret, is the state didn't do the job very well, right? Tried, right? But lots of different change. Things did not go real well with those folks who are now put in charge to make things go well. So Inglewood is one. They are the only one with a state administrator still. Then there's Vallejo. So Vallejo City Unified School District they are in receivership, and what they have is they have what they call a state trustee. So when you go in receivership, a couple things happen. One, when you have a state loan, as long as you have a state loan, and they say on average your state loan is 20 years. So for 20 years on average, you will never fully get your district back. So what happens is in the most severe cases, they put the state administrator in there. When things start to shift a little bit, they're able to hire a district superintendent. They give authority back to the board. But in every case where they continue to have a loan, they have a state trustee. And so in Vallejo, in South Monterey, which used to be called King City, and in Oakland, Unified, they have, those other three folks have a state trustee. Basically, it's a state trustee is a board member, right, who on behalf of the state is watching out for the state's money. And they have authority to stay and rescind, and they have some ability to be able to stop some of the board actions. That's what their role is. Prior to 1840, with the CCE, the state superintendent has always had the ability to say to the CCE, we'd like you to go in and work with this district. Two places where that had happened prior to 1840 was in Englewood. So last spring, Carl was contacted by Tom Torlakson, and Tom asked him to go into that district to be able to provide some support academically. And then in Vallejo, the actual district superintendent contacted me and then contacted the county superintendent and said, hey, would you come in and help us? We actually had to write a letter, they had to write a letter to the Tom Torlakson requesting for us to go in there. And the reason why that's important, that just allows us to use our funding. Without it, we can't use our funding. Mike, thank you. So 1840, what happened with 1840 is, and this is the way sausage is made in California and in Sacramento. In particular with 1840, I got a call from the deputy superintendent who worked for Tom Torlakson on a Monday. And he said, hey, I'm hearing these things about 1840 where they're going to take the authority away from the state superintendent and they're going to give it now to county offices. So when a district is in receivership, based on the local control idea, we're going to have the county office where that district is located will be in charge now of putting the state administrator in, helping that district get back on their feet. Oh, and also they're talking about having the CCE would automatically be appointed to go in and help. I was like, okay, do I get any funding? No. Does the county soup get any new funding? No. And what do they want us to do? He's like, I don't know. So I called the Department of Finance, right? And I called them on Friday at 4:45. I got a call back from the Department of Finance. And they're like, what's up? And I said, hey, I heard about this thing with 1840. I heard you're going to assign us automatically to the district. What do you want us to do? And they said, what do you want to do? I'm like, well, if you give me the weekend, I'll kind of come up with some language and do whatever. And they said, we have 15 minutes to bills due. So what do you want to do, Tom? Like, well, in the work that we've been doing in Englewood and what have you, one of the things that we're finding and in Vallejo and some of these other places, right, is that we're finding they have lots of plans, right? So they have a strategic plan, they have an LCAP plan, they have these reports from FICMAT, they have all these plans. And what we're trying to find is we're always trying to bring those together and figure out if there's any coherence between those plans, right? Where are they aligned? Where's the gaps? And in Englewood in particular and Vallejo, they were saying we need resources, and they're absolutely right. And one of the struggles we were having is saying we were worried about, do we put the resource in there? And if we put the resource in there, what's its sustainability, right? Are there systems in place that make sure that will fit into other things that we know about, systemic change to make sure that they're in place? And we were finding sometimes they were in one plan, not in another. So we really feel like we should do this academic review. We really feel like we should do this review of the district academically first. And then once we do that, we think we can play a role in actually facilitating all the players at the table trying to figure out what we can do to support that district, put that plan in place. And that's the language in the bill. So I said this to her, she's like, all right, I got it. And it came out on Monday, and that's the language that's continued to be in the bill. So we are now doing some work in Oakland. We're now in South Monterey. We're already in Vallejo. We're already in Englewood. It's taken a large part of our time. It is really good work. It's really important work. And those of you who've heard Carl, also it's really slow work. It takes time. It's not, there's no quick fixes. There's nothing easy about those things. The difficulties exist in those districts are really large, right? And there are no simple solutions. So part of our role in particular is we are collaborators and facilitators. We try to be strategic thought partners, and we try to be resource connectors. As I mentioned, there's only 20 of us. So part of our job is to try to figure out how we can help districts in that work. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the system of support. There are 3 levels to it. And I'm going to skip through some of this quickly because I'm afraid I'm going to run out of time like I always do. And so in the state system of support, The state, you'll see they've identified there's 3 layers to it. The first layer is what they call level 1. These are level 1 services that they believe every district in the state and school should have access to. I refer to them things like the framework, right? You got the frameworks, we have Common Core standards, right? We have some basic tools that go around there. There's PowerPoints out there around the dashboard, some basic tools that kind of outline kind of what the resources are out there. Level 2 is what they now call differentiated assistance. So when a district now, according to the dashboard, doesn't meet the targets that are on the dashboard, the district has to go through what they call differentiated assistance. Now, one of the key pieces I want you to recognize is I said the word district. This whole accountability system is all built around districts. It's not about schools. That's a huge difference from the old system. The old system would identify specific schools. Our state system does not identify schools. It identifies districts. Where we identify schools is ESSA, right? So the federal system, right? The old No Child Left Behind that's now called ESSA requires every state to identify their 5% lowest schools. And I will tell you at the state board level, they hate that. Our board went back and forth for a couple of years with the federal folks not wanting to do that. They are adamant about not wanting to, because it ranks schools. And they didn't want to rank schools, right? They didn't want to identify them as the lowest point and put these labels on them in particular, but they're required to. So this differentiated assistance is new, and it's through county offices. So in this system of support, I'll show you in a minute, county offices receive funding, right? They do it based on the districts that qualify. So if you're a district and you're in a county office, the county office gets money in particular to help that district go in to do what they call this root cause analysis to try to figure out where they're struggling and then help them walk through some processes of how they're going to address that issue. Key to that piece is they don't get to tell them what to do. They walk them through these tools to try to help do some analysis. Then the district decides on what they're going to do based on their local needs. That's how that system is set up. The third level is what they call intensive intervention. There is not a district in the state that's in intensive intervention. The system is built that way on purpose. There are some folks that would tell you it will take 7 years of failure before a district would ever get into intensive intervention, just mathematically. Because if you look at the data, you've got to be read in multiple things for many, many years. So they purposely put it more back here, right? With the hope we never get there. And the reason why is because they've never been able to figure this out. The old system never worked. They've never been able to figure that piece out. The only thing it says in the statute is you would have not been able to meet all these targets for many, many years. And we're in that language. The CC would have already been in there doing some work in that district, and we would have already somewhat thrown our hands up and said, we can't help them either. And then it's the state superintendent's responsibility to figure out what to do. Isn't that interesting? Because you think about AB 1840, they just took that authority away from 1840. Now they give it back here under level 3, but they put the system in place that may not even occur with the same state superintendent because they'll probably be termed out by that time. Question?
Stand up and speak louder. Do you have any data analysis showing which resources or support have been most effective in the districts you targeted? And is any of that public?
So question was, do you have any resources, right, in the districts that are struggling and that have worked, right? And the second piece is any of that public? So that's a difficult question when you're saying you, right? So part around this differentiated assistance is county offices, not necessarily CCEE. Okay, so what I can share with you is that in our work in this last 3 years, in particular with our pilot districts, yes, we have some particular things that we've learned, which is really what the pilot was about really on how to help a district move forward. In this differentiated assistance, too early. Right? They've just did this the second year, and most of it hasn't even occurred in this piece yet. We have done a little bit of differentiated assistance. We do a little bit different than county offices, so we're a little bit early in that stage. I'll try to see if hopefully our slides, I think a couple of them may address that a little bit in particular. How am I doing on time? 10 more minutes, okay. So anyway, so this is the first part of it. There's these 3 levels of the system. And then this diagram in particular is probably the best example of describing it. And so when you see this diagram, what I want to tell you about this is in my first couple of months on the job, we in the governor's budget last year, he put new language around the state system of support, and it identified our role. Our role in particular is we are tasked with working with, for those who may not be able to see this, this is us, this is the California Department of Education. In particular, in statute, it says the California Department of Education and the California Collaborative have this responsibility to help manage this system and facilitate it for school districts. In so many words. And the way that it's built is, you saw those 3 levels over here, here's the local LEA. And remember, this is districts. So how districts, what they do with their schools is still their decision. Here's the LEA. The first layer of support are county offices, and they get funding in particular to help districts, to be a resource for districts. Then they created these new geographic lead agencies. There are 9 county offices in the state that make up 7 geographic leads. What that means is basically they've split the state, so every county office is covered, and they have a responsibility to make sure that every county office within their geographic boundaries has the ability to provide technical assistance for school districts. Still recognizing they're defining what technical assistance means, but the minimum level is differentiated assistance. So, for example, if you're a district in Modoc, right? Modoc's very small, I know because they were in our former region, or Trinity, right, who are really tiny, and their county office is very small and doesn't really have the capacity to serve that district. That geographic lead now would have some responsibility to make sure that that district has access to the same resources as someone as LA Unified. Those were chosen. We had to choose those this year. They've already been chosen, so they're now beginning that work. And then they created a bunch of other leads. Some of these have already existed, right? Some of you are probably familiar with MTSS. Equity leads are new. The math initiative is new. Community engagement is a new initiative, right? We actually have a co-lead role in that one in particular. SELPA resource leads, we actually have a role in that according to statute as well. So we had to help choose these folks and the community engagement folks, the EL specialists. So these are all various resources across the state that are available. So if I'm a county office and I'm working with a district, I always use Shasta County, for example, because that was my world. In Shasta County, we were very white, right? And so in that county in particular, when it came to EL students, if EL students moved in and had needed resources, we had very few for them, right? We didn't have a lot of resources around the particular needs of students because we didn't have a lot of students. And we would struggle at times to try to figure out what that would be. We would reach out to Butte, which had more of a migrant population, and Butte County could help us with their folks come in and try to help identify some needs. That's just because we had a relationship with Butte. The way this is built now is this geographic lead has a responsibility to actually understand what all those resources are. So if they get a call from one of their county offices that's working with the district, and it could be around EL, they can say, oh yeah, we have some resources even within our other counties. We also have a state lead in particular on that, and let's connect you with them so that that district gets that resource. That's the state system of support. That's how it's built. And what's really unique about it is it's really built around folks collaborating and working together to try to maximize the resources that are in place. When I talked about yesterday being a really unique day, yesterday, so in statute it says the department and the California Collaborative, we have a responsibility to bring those folks together and try to figure out how we're going to actualize all this thing. Yesterday we brought them all together for the first time. It was cool. We had 80 people in the room. First time ever, anything like this, where the department's in the room, State Board of Ed staff in the room. We were facilitating it, and all these folks passionate about kids coming together and trying to figure out how we're going to make this thing work so we can make a difference for the lives of children. It was a very, very cool day. We were so excited we couldn't wait to get that day going, and folks really left with a lot of excitement. It's going to be very hard. It's a very hard system to it can be quite complex, but that's that state system as a whole. So because I'm going to run out of time, I'm going to skip some of this. This just talks a little bit of how folks are able to access our services, again, by statute. I mentioned, I think I'll just speak to this real briefly. This is just a map if you wanted to see, sorry. Don't do it. There you go. This is where they exist. So if you want it to be able, you'll see this on our website. This is who all those folks are. So by color, you'll see which county offices are the geographic leads, who are the SELPA leads, who are the SELPA content leads, the equity leads. These are all the folks in the state that are getting resources and money to be able to be a support for school districts in that work. So because of time, I'm going to go ahead and skip forward. The thing I can tell you about the AB 1840 districts is it's different in every district that we're in. I'd mentioned we were already in Englewood. In Englewood, we continue to keep doing what we were doing, right? We just got a little bit more systemic about our academic reviews. Vallejo, we were already doing some work, same thing. In Oakland, right now, one of the discussions we're having in Oakland is that if you're following what's going on in Oakland, anybody from Oakland in the room? Yes? Did you raise your hand?
Yes.
Huh? What's that?
I was raised there. But
Raised there. Okay, so everybody's following, right, what's going on in Oakland, right? They're probably going to strike, right, pretty quickly. They have to cut millions of dollars, right? Vallejo's cutting 22 million. Englewood's cutting $1 million. Part of our job is we're trying, as they're trying to make these cuts, trying to figure out what stays, right, so that the needs of kids are served. The other piece is what some folks ask, well, Tom, why in these fiscal distress, why'd they put the CCE in there? There's not a district in the state that's gone into receivership that hasn't struggled with students. As you can imagine, right? It's a resource issue, right? So part of it is that they have less resources, right? Academically, things are cut. And what happens is often those are extremely random. So one of the things we're doing in Oakland was Oakland actually asked us and said, look, we've got to make this like $30 million worth of cuts. Is there any way you can sit down with us and look at what we're thinking about cutting, look at what we had in our LCAP, and identify the things that wouldn't get cut? So they're the key strategies and the key things, resources to make sure that we can really make sure that what's left will really help students. And then help them build their new LCAP around some of that work too in particular. So South Monterey, just so you know, South Monterey, they're not having to make cuts. They have actually been doing pretty well financially and have gotten over the hump. They still have to pay their loan, but they are not a negative certified district. They're a positive certified district, but they have some huge academic struggles. And so in there, we're trying to figure out how can we support them in some of what their academic needs are. So one of the things I want to leave you with is I had mentioned, and I think part of the question was around what are some of the things that you have done pretty well. And I'll give you a couple key things. Where I think we've learned the most is in our pilot districts. So we got quite a bit of resources to bring these folks together for 3 years. And with them, we experimented, right? We brought them together for these summits 4 times a year. We asked them to bring leadership teams together. We asked them to have the superintendent at the table. We gave them a coach. We gave them financial resources. Coach had to go back and work with them. We did what we call short cycles, the old PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act model. We would do it. They would determine what they were going to work on. They'd take a short cycle for a couple of months, do that whole PDSA model. We helped them with that, come back together, adjust, right? What are we going to do differently? How are we going to do this so that you don't just wait till the end of the year? And some of the things we learned in particular is if the superintendent is not at the table, it doesn't get done. But bottom line, in any district we're in, and we've had a few of them that have been more successful than others, superintendent has got to be the instructional leader. Many, many reasons for that, right? Modeling, resources, really buying into it. We've had some where we required that, and superintendent exited somewhere along the line and said, you guys figure that out. Every case haven't been as successful. Coach, key. The coach is a key piece. Because what happens is, and I'm going to use you guys as examples, right? You go away from your districts, you come back, you spend some time in here, you get fired up, you're going to do all these things, then we go back, and then there's the work, right? A month goes by, and we're like, I was going to do all those things or whatever, and I just didn't do it, right? The coach actually is a check-in. You build it in the system, I'm coming. I'm going to be there next week. I'm going to be there 2 weeks from now. It keeps kind of everybody on track, right? And then also is reaching back to us to talk about how we could help them with the resources. The summits really help, right? Very much like this room, right? What we find is when you bring people from various places together, right, you get to hear other voices. You get to hear other solutions from other folks who've done it, and you get to learn from each other. They love the summits. They really appreciate the summits. The summits are about right. And then we also bring in great examples of good work. We bring in districts who've been more successful than others. We bring in some strategies that folks are being able to use so they have some models that they can look at and go, oh, I can do that. What's key to that piece is the districts you bring in have to be working with kids like theirs. You can't bring in a district with a bunch of high-end folks who are not struggling with poverty, right, or not struggling with some other issues that made the district, and then talk to them about all the great things you do, and their kids look different than the kids that are in your schools, right? Educators were like, nah, I don't buy that. I do it with my kids, and I'll believe you, are some of the key pieces. One of the districts in particular, I think Carl spoke to about this district last year, we're really excited about, and so we did some work around, a video around some of the work that we've done with them. So I'm going to share that with you, and then I'll call it a day. All right, is there any way, come on. So there's a video in here. Does somebody have it on their computer? Can he hit that play button? Where's the computer? Right here? I think I got it. Hopefully. I'm a Mac guy, so this guy might get me confused. Come on, baby. No? What do you guys got it? What do you think? There should be a play button there. Probably not going to work, right? Because we don't have it installed. All right. It's amazing, by the way, so you should go check it out. If you go to our website and check it out, it's the story of a district in the state that has had failure for over 25 years, right? And it's one of our pilot districts with a really strong superintendent, really strong teachers, principals, everybody kind of working together, the school board supporting them. They've made some incredible growth over the last couple of years. So what I would encourage you to do is, if you would, go and check it out. It's really, really well done. It's something that we're really proud of. Yes, ma'am.
This is not a question, but a recommendation. CCEE has a great set of webinars and trainings.
Thank you.
And they did one on stakeholder engagement and parent engagement around the 10th and the 12th of last month. It's recorded. And any of you who are struggling with parent engagement, with stakeholder engagement, I really highly recommend it. They're going to have one coming up on LCS. What is your February one?
It's actually going to be on a particular high school that's made some gains recently.
Great webinar series.
Yeah. Yeah, on our website, so www.ccee-ca.org. That's it, right? All you got to do is go search for CCEE. It'll take you there. We hired a communication specialist last year, and so part of what we wanted to do is we want to make sure that we are sharing examples of good work. So we have these podcasts that are on there. I just did a podcast last week on ESSA. There's a lot of folks who are saying, how's ESSA fit into the new state system? So we did a podcast on that. You'll see some of the videos from our pilots. You'll see these other, we're calling resource toolkits that you can take and download and use specifically. There's some on the dashboard. There's some on LCAP. They're intended to be resources that are available for folks too of some good work that we're doing. So
thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
Just as before we transition, I know that we had a couple of our folks really think about some responses to your presentations, but before we ask them, just wanted to hear your thoughts as you're hearing about the work that's happening with technology, the work that we're doing. How do you envision that could potentially fall into what you're offering in terms of support for struggling?
Yeah, I think what I would say about technology is very similar to what I would say about a lot of the work that we know works for children, right? And I heard the CEO say this earlier too, is that I think technology is a great example of that. Is what works is educators' work, right? It's what you put in the hands of people, right, who care about children, right, and or take the time to be able to use that resource to be able to help close some of that divide, right? So what I would tell you about technology is that in particular, and again, you know, a little bit preaching to the choir, right? Because that was kind of my background when I was a teacher. I was one of the first ones that had a demonstration classroom, and I talked about some of the work I did at the county level too. But one of the things that I know about that work is what's unique about your work is two things. What always frustrated me when I was a superintendent, especially at the end of the year, is when I would get these huge purchase orders requests at the end of the year that my principals were going to purchase a lot of equipment, right? Part of it is they were going to lose their money in their budget, so let's buy technology. And my pushback always with, I'm cool with the technology, where's the training that goes with it, right? Where's the software? Where's the tools that we're going to use, and how are we going to use that to drive instruction? Answer that question for me, and I'm in. You answer that question, right, as part of your model. The other piece that's really unique, I believe, in particular with this group, is you involve parents, right? One of the things that's really unique about even this whole system of support and this whole stakeholder engagement is really trying to embrace parents and bring parents into this role, right? That's a key piece, a key piece. And I will tell you, with our at-risk students, we really struggle with that. Right, fortunately, we had high school kids, and many of those kids were so much better with technology than we could ever think of being. But their parents were not engaged. We struggled to do them. We struggled to get those folks in there too. So I think, in particular, those two pieces, right? If you don't have the training that comes with it, which you do, and if you don't have parents engaged in that, you're going to struggle to use that tool.
Terrific. And I know we had a couple of our folks, so actually I'm going to go out of order a little bit because we do have Inglewood here. So Ms. Burris, I know that you're in the room. Go ahead, Raquel. Wanted to get your thoughts on what you heard from Mr. Armelino.
Well, definitely. I mean, some of what you shared gave me a more clear picture. I'm at a school site, obviously, so there are some things that are not always communicated to us at the school site. So we have a better understanding of what's really happening with our district and our schools. So I appreciate that. We are trying to build our programs and trying to merge the technology piece into what we're doing with our teachers and our parents. And so we need resources in Inglewood, as you've already mentioned. And how do we also, under the circumstances, how do we get our district people who are making big decisions to really understand the value, because we are only one school in Inglewood that has school to home. And we don't want to lose that because we know it's critical to address this digital divide that we face. There's so much more to try to understand about the situation that we're in as a district, but particularly at a school site, just trying to maintain what we do have and keep it in place as they try to mull through how to keep our district alive.
Yeah. The challenges are so great. You live them every day. In particular, the thing I will tell you is, one of the things I had in my slide is, a lot of people ask me, Tom, you think the system's going to work? Right? And I'm like, what I can tell you is that I do believe in the system, but I'm worried about it, right? Because there's that loose, tight piece, right? The old system was really tight, right? We're going to identify people. We're going to rank them, right? We're going to add some punishment to them when they didn't well, and we're going to come in and tell them what to do. Too tight, right? Didn't work. Our system right now, too loose, in my opinion. A little bit too loose, right? And the other piece that's missing with it is that, as I shared, I asked you that question, teachers and schools are pretty distant from a lot of what's happening. Last year in differentiated assistance, I got to visit the county offices. Last year, 358 districts qualified for differentiated assistance. I think that's right. County offices, when you ask them about that and ask them how many of them, when you did differentiated assistance, did you have teachers at the table and school administrators? It was less than 10%. Less than 10%. So the folks who do the work every day with children, right, who understand that's the whole idea of this local needs, are not at the table. A little too loose, right? So we've got to figure that piece out. What I always tell folks all the time is that if you're having success in Inglewood, it's because of teachers and a principal in a school who are figuring this thing out on their own. It's often despite the district. Not that the district isn't trying to do good things, they are on fire. They got all kinds of other issues, right? And they're not supporting you. They want to, they just can't, right? So if it's happening, it's just happening because those folks have figured it out. That's not acceptable, right? We've got to figure out that piece. I don't know that answer. I do think it's going to get a little bit tighter. What I do tell people is one of the things that will really help is it's somewhat of a mind shift for us. We have to start thinking this new accountability system is not built around punishment. It's not really built around a status. The old system, if you were identified, you're like, oh no, I'm a PI school, I got to send letters home, parents I might have to bus them to different schools. That's not the way the system is built. Our board did that state board did it on purpose. You actually get resources. You actually get resources. If you're an ESSA school, nothing's happening to you. You have to if you look at the rules around ESSA right now, you basically have to rewrite your school plan. Or rewrite you have to identify, even in your LCAP, they have to identify what are they going to do different in their LCAP for that school, right? That's a good thing, all right? Now somebody's paying attention and is supposed to be able to give us the resources.
That's why I was asking if there's a place on the internet or something where we can look at data and we can look at results. Because even if this new system doesn't succeed or doesn't stay in existence very long, maybe some of the results could be helpful to
Yep.
principals or to school districts.
Yep.
And maybe they could use them before they're in that
Right.
status where they need your
Yep.
intervention.
Yeah. Again, that's to me is a problem in the system.
And with data also.
Right. The problem with the data is that we're still early in the game, right? And so the state, because they don't want to rank, right? I hear this everywhere I go. Folks, can somebody tell me who's doing it well? Last year it was special ed, right? Large. The two biggest issues that the schools are being identified in the dashboard are special ed and absenteeism. Those are the two big issues in suspensions. Those are the three, right? People ask me all the time, can you show me a district that's like mine that's doing that well? The dashboard we can't get there. They won't do it because they don't want to rank folks. So we're struggling with that piece too. We're actually having to ask people to raise their hand a little bit and tell us they're doing something, and we're actually going out and studying them and trying to actually see are they really making gains so that we can make that more available. Because we do feel like that there's a need. But no, there is not. That doesn't exist right now, purposely on the state's part. That's the part that's a little too loose for me.
Okay, so thank you very much. And we have a couple other quick comments. We have Principal Chapman from Leotard Floyd.
How you doing, everybody? Eric Chapman here again. I was asked to kind of respond to a couple of things. One that I was taken back was your story around narrative around you're most captivated by the beginning of your speak about the kids at your school, particularly the African American boy that was in that students. And what we know about our work, turnaround models, et cetera, it's in relationships, authenticity. And people talk about relationships all the time. And what that teacher realized very early on was that she didn't have a relationship with him. And our students and families are like stress testers. They will sabotage relationship all the time as a way to determine, are you actually in? Are you actually committed to what it's going to require to take my student from currently where they are academically to where we want them to be in regards to their hopes and dreams? And our systems don't ask those questions. And our systems are actually designed to get the outcomes they're intended to get. And it's alarming, I'll say, it's alarming to hear that when you call whatever department you call, and their response is, what do you want to do? Again, that's a system getting the outcomes it's designed to get. And so then it creates a little urgency on my part, make sure you don't get to this point. And then also concerning about there aren't any models. Well, there are models. Whole child education, community schools models, et cetera, that are pushing initiatives. And because what's happening in education currently, especially in urban education, is there needs to be this hard pivot away from this industrialized sense of how we're just preparing kids for a workforce. And oftentimes for our kids in our communities, that workforce isn't designed for them either. And so at every stop, we're not creating access points for our kids and for our families to kind of actualize a difference for themselves than what they already have now. And so now the system of accountability is just another way of telling that community, telling that school they're not doing a good job for their kids. And one thing I heard from a student the other day, he said, Mr. Chapman, he goes, we did our benchmark. He said, I'm on grade level, Mr. Chapman. And I knew from looking at it, he wasn't. But what was important about what he said out loud was he thought he was. And when you think you are, then you will be. And those are the pathways to helping children actualize a difference for themselves. And then our system has to be designed around how to do that. And sometimes you're just building this thing in the air. And it sounds, no disrespect, it sounds like oftentimes with some of this stuff is it choose being. This is kind of like the 50,000 foot view of turnaround models. And so what I've learned in our time at my school, and we'll talk about that later this afternoon, is that it's a community schools approach is it's not going to be a principal. It's not going to be a teacher. It's not going to be a principal and their team that create system changes for their school and their community. It's going to be the community itself. And relationships are hard. And you have to kind of push through the milieu and the muckiness of those relationships until the families there and the kids actually trust you enough to tell you their story. And then through their story, you create a system that's designed to serve their needs. And that's what we're finding, and we'll talk about, Trish and I will share about a little bit about tonight about our school, but whole child education, community schools models, and then also turnaround models cost. They just do. And we're underfunding public education way too much. And I have to spend the bulk of my time finding grants to fund one-to-one, to fund PD, to fund coaching, to fund collaboration, to fund all the things that I need to help my students. We have we're a full service community schools model. We have a nurse, we have a psychologist, we have a social worker. All those things cost. And at one point you kind of create foundationally what works for schools in a turnaround model. And then we know that those grants are short term. And then I got to tell my family he's no longer the nurse Tawny, he's not here anymore. I got to tell the social worker you can't work here anymore. But in public housing, a third of our kids turn over. Those systems are always going to need to be in place. But we don't find a way to fund them in the way that's needed because we don't look at schools and communities in the way that they're supposed to be looked at authentically. We look at them as a system of a whole. And those systems, again, are designed to get the outcomes they achieve, and our kids continue to fail and our families continue to fail.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Armelino. In general, I think we want to be a partner. Same thing, just like we told Assembly Chair O'Donnell. Is that up? We want to be helpful as much as possible to communicate, to have that way for these folks who are on the ground to communicate what the needs are, to share our best practices, and it's going to be a team effort, and it's a lot of. I mean, the work that lies ahead it's monumental, and you need all hands on deck, and we're here to help. So we want to be a partner in that process.
Thank you. And again, I want to thank you. And again, it's a really authentic thank you for just being educators, right? Being folks who care about children, right? It's an extremely hard job. And as you mentioned too, it's if anybody read the book, The Color of Law, read that book. Holy moly, right? Mr. Chapman talked about our systems get what we have designed to do. Read The Color of Law and you'll know what I'm talking about, right? The schools and where poverty exists and where the inequities exist were actually designed. Our schools didn't happen by chance, right? I talk about The Color of Law all the way back to like the 30s and 40s, all the way what happened in Richmond and factories. It's alarming to me, right, to think about our systems are set up for inequity, right? And now we're all trying to figure out equity's the new, I always say it's like the new coconut water, right? Folks use that word like it's a simple, easy thing to do, right? And equities were designed in our system, and we're trying to break them in a system that was designed to actually create them. Extremely difficult to do. Anyway, thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom.